The day the documentary dropped, the world paused. Netflix had quietly released it at midnight, but within hours, social media erupted. Screens lit up everywhere. Phones, TVs, laptops, and a single phrase trended globally: The Reckoning. Fans rushed to stream the footage, not knowing they were about to witness revelations that would shatter lives, reignite old controversies, and send shockwaves through the music and legal worlds alike. This was not another celebrity expose. This was a deep dive into secrets long hidden, a meticulously crafted account that had been months in the making, spearheaded by none other than 50 Cent, whose name alone carried the weight of credibility and streetwise authority. From the opening moments, the tone was clear. This was not entertainment. The documentary opened with archival footage, grainy and raw, juxtaposed with recent interviews. Former associates, journalists, and victims spoke in hushed tones, revealing intimate details that had never surfaced in public courtrooms. Every word, every frame, seemed designed to provoke thought, stir emotion, and destabilize carefully maintained narratives. Social media exploded with snippets of dialogue, gifs of shocked faces, and heated commentary. Fans were torn between disbelief and fascination. How could such information have been kept under wraps for so long? The first victim interviews were devastating. Their voices trembled, eyes filled with pain, as they recounted moments of manipulation, threats, and betrayal. 50 Cent's approach was unflinching. He let the footage speak for itself, refusing to sensationalize or dramatize unnecessarily. This authenticity cut through the usual celebrity noise, forcing viewers to confront the raw reality behind the headlines. Online forums lit up with people debating every scene, every word, dissecting body language, inconsistencies in past interviews, and subtle cues that pointed to deeper truths. Even casual viewers who had never followed Diddy's life closely found themselves gripped, unable to look away. Leaked phone calls were interwoven with commentary, creating a chilling narrative. Listeners could hear the manipulation, the control, the cold calculation that had remained hidden behind Diddy's public persona. Each clip seemed to confirm suspicions that had long simmered in the background of tabloid speculation. But now, with concrete evidence, the rumors gained weight and urgency. Journalists began posting side-by-side comparisons, court statements versus documentary revelations, highlighting contradictions, evasions, and deliberate omissions. The internet became a living courtroom, with every user taking sides, debating motives, and questioning ethics. Influencers and legal analysts quickly joined the conversation. Overnight, live streams popped up where experts examined the documentary frame by frame. Lawyers commented on the potential ramifications, discussing the possibility of reopening cases or revisiting previously settled matters. Public fascination was intense, but so was outrage. Many viewers expressed anger, not just at Diddy, but at a system that had allowed these actions to remain unchallenged for so long. Social media was a tidal wave of hashtags, with Number the Reckoning, Number Justice for Victims, and Number Diddy Exposed leading the charge. Memes, reaction videos, and debates spread like wildfire, amplifying the documentary's impact far beyond its original audience. By mid-afternoon, mainstream news outlets caught up, covering every angle: the release, the content, the public reaction, and the potential legal consequences. The documentary had transcended entertainment and entered the realm of cultural phenomenon, forcing a re-evaluation of celebrity accountability, media complicity, and justice delayed. The narrative was now larger than Diddy himself. It had become a story about truth, exposure, and the power of one individual to challenge decades of secrecy. As the night fell, the tension only grew. Cassie's legal team had been watching quietly, analyzing every frame. They had been waiting for a moment like this, a catalyst that could change the trajectory of a long-stalled legal process. Emails flew between offices, meetings were scheduled, calls made in hushed urgency. Meanwhile, Diddy's publicists scrambled to control the narrative, issuing vague statements that only fueled speculation. Panic was visible in subtle ways. Delayed responses, careful word choices, and an underlying sense of inevitability. For the first time, it seemed as if the carefully maintained facade was beginning to crack. The documentary closed its first segment with a chilling montage. Victims' faces, intercut with evidence previously unseen, paired with ominous music that seemed to echo the collective heartbeat of viewers worldwide. It was impossible to ignore the gravity of what had been revealed. For millions, the impact was immediate. Disbelief, anger, and curiosity collided, creating a storm that could not be contained. Every tweet, comment, and post seemed to add fuel to an already blazing fire. People knew this was only the beginning. The legal ramifications, the public scrutiny, and the personal consequences for those involved were just beginning to unfold. As midnight passed into the early hours, one thing was clear. 50 Cent's documentary had not just told a story, it had ignited a reckoning. And the world was watching, waiting, and questioning. Little did anyone know, the next days would bring a cascade of events that would shake courtrooms, the music industry, and the very notion of justice itself. The morning after the documentary release, the digital world was in chaos. News outlets ran headlines that blurred the line between reporting and spectacle, each story attempting to capture the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Social media had become a battlefield of opinions, accusations, and analysis, where every clip from the reckoning was dissected endlessly. Viewers watched, paused, and replayed moments where Diddy's involvement in the events seemed most tangible, comparing it to public records, interviews, and court transcripts. The flood of information created a frenzy. Few could separate speculation from fact, yet everyone felt compelled to comment, react, and share. At the center of it all, the evidence presented in the documentary was methodical and precise. 50 Cent had spent months collating files, recordings, and first-hand accounts that painted a picture more vivid and more damning than anything previously made public. Leaked emails, financial transactions, and surveillance footage were intercut with testimonies, exposing a pattern of calculated decisions that implicated high-profile figures and quieted long-held suspicions. Every frame seemed designed to make viewers reconsider what they thought they knew. Analysts and legal experts began live-streaming reaction videos, explaining the significance of each detail, sometimes breaking down complex transactions in real time. People were captivated, but also disturbed. It was no longer gossip, it was documentation. As the hours passed, attention shifted to the personal toll the revelations took on those directly affected. Victims spoke again, this time in follow-up interviews recorded exclusively for the documentary's extended release. Their accounts were raw, often punctuated by tears or trembling voices, describing how the events had shaped their lives and how silence had been enforced by fear and intimidation. One former associate recounted nights of frantic negotiations, threats whispered behind closed doors, and the constant pressure to remain quiet. Another described the emotional turmoil, the loss of trust in institutions, and the weight of carrying secrets for decades. Each story added layers of depth to the narrative, emphasizing the human cost behind the public spectacle. Meanwhile, Diddy's response, or lack thereof, dominated the public discourse. His team released carefully worded statements that sidestepped direct questions, refusing to engage with the allegations directly. Every press release was analyzed for subtle cues, choice of words, tone, and timing. Analysts suggested that even a minor slip could be catastrophic, as viewers scrutinized every syllable for hidden admissions. Public perception began shifting subtly, influenced not only by the evidence presented but by the strategic silence and misdirection from Diddy's camp. Speculation ran rampant. Legal commentators debated whether this silence indicated guilt, a calculated strategy, or something far more complex. The documentary also introduced a timeline that had never been seen before. Events, meetings, and communications were arranged chronologically, revealing patterns and connections previously obscured. The timeline created a framework for understanding how various incidents were linked, exposing a network of influence, deception, and power. Legal scholars noted how this new chronology could influence ongoing investigations, potentially reopening cases that had been considered closed or settled. Public forums lit up with discussions dissecting dates, cross-referencing events, and theorizing motives. Every revelation felt like a jigsaw piece finally finding its place, but also pointed to even deeper layers yet to be uncovered. One particularly haunting segment focused on a late-night call that had never reached public attention before. The audio, raw and unedited, captured the fear and urgency in the voice of a key witness, alongside the cold, calculated responses of those implicated. For viewers, the scene was surreal. For investigators, it was a critical piece of corroboration. Social media users clipped and shared the exchange, with hashtags multiplying by the minute. Memes, reaction videos, and detailed breakdowns proliferated, creating a digital echo chamber where each new piece of evidence amplified public awareness and anxiety. As the day moved forward, the focus shifted to the repercussions beyond social media. Law enforcement agencies were inundated with inquiries, tips, and leads. Lawyers representing victims analyzed the documentary to identify potential legal avenues, exploring whether statutes of limitations, new evidence, or previously overlooked witness testimony could reopen investigations. The documentary had become more than a film. It had become a catalyst for action, a call to re-examine justice in ways that had been impossible before. By evening, the cultural and legal impact was undeniable. Communities discussed the documentary in cafes, offices, and online forums. People debated morality, accountability, and the role of media in shaping narratives. What had started as a film had evolved into a global conversation about truth, responsibility, and power. The stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. The revelations were only the beginning, and the real consequences, the legal, personal, and societal ramifications were just starting to unfold. And in the shadows, the implicated watched and waited, understanding for the first time that the world had shifted. The documentary had opened a door that could never be closed. Every decision, every denial, every strategic move from here on out would be scrutinized. The reckoning had begun, and there was no turning back. The morning after the documentary's release, the ripple effects were impossible to ignore. News cycles no longer merely reported, they interrogated. Headlines screamed implications. Television networks replayed clips of the most damning moments in endless loops. Legal analysts dissected every frame, every pause, every carefully chosen word. The documentary had not only reignited interest in a cold case, but had reframed the entire narrative. What had once been murky suspicion was now a living, breathing investigation broadcast to millions. Every tweet, every post, every shared video carried weight. Viewers were now participants, piecing together the puzzle alongside authorities. The pressure was beginning to manifest in subtle, yet unmistakable ways. Former associates of Diddy and other implicated figures started to surface, drawn out by the documentary's unrelenting scrutiny. Some called anonymously, fearful of retaliation, yet compelled to share what they knew. Others came forward publicly, their faces on screen, names included, providing first-hand accounts that lent credibility to decades of rumors. Their testimonies often contained minute details, dates, locations, and financial exchanges that filled in gaps previously deemed irrelevant or inconsequential. Each disclosure created new angles for investigators and new material for journalists desperate to stay ahead of the story. Meanwhile, public opinion was a volatile mix of disbelief, outrage, and fascination. Social media became a real-time courtroom where every post was evidence and every comment a verdict. Hashtags proliferated, debates ignited, and trends shifted by the hour. The documentary had not just reported history, it had rewritten it. Online forums buzzed with comparisons of Diddy's documented actions versus public persona, and each revelation sparked waves of disbelief. Memes and reaction videos flooded timelines, but beneath the humor and shock was a deep engagement. Viewers analyzed legal documents, rewatched archived footage, and cross-referenced interviews. The documentary had turned passive audiences into amateur detectives. Inside the legal sphere, pressure was mounting at an unprecedented rate. Investigators revisited cold files with fresh eyes, guided by the documentary's meticulous timeline. Prosecutors discussed the possibility of reopening cases, now armed with corroborated evidence, witness statements, and previously overlooked material. Courtrooms braced for a potential surge in subpoenas as attorneys for victims prepared to file motions, seeking justice after years of delay. What was once speculation was now backed by meticulously documented facts. Every financial transaction highlighted in the film, every phone record, every confidential memo became a potential cornerstone for a case that had long been dormant. Even the broader entertainment industry felt tremors. The documentary had blurred lines between investigative journalism and high-stakes exposé, forcing studios, networks, and streaming platforms to reconsider how such content could influence real-world legal proceedings. Producers debated ethical responsibilities, while marketers weighed the implications of promoting content with active legal consequences. Analysts observed that the documentary's success might encourage a new era of transparency in entertainment reporting, where stories were not just dramatized but meticulously fact-checked, presenting audiences with evidence rather than mere speculation. Meanwhile, Diddy's public image faced a critical crossroads. His silence was being interpreted in countless ways. Some believed it was strategic, a calculated gamble to avoid self-incrimination. Others interpreted it as tacit admission of guilt. PR teams scrambled to craft statements, interview appearances, and controlled releases to mitigate damage. But the narrative momentum had shifted. In the age of viral content, a single misstep could spiral into a headline that would dominate global discourse. Legal experts noted that perception often influenced jury pools, making the court of public opinion almost as consequential as the courtroom itself. Beyond legal and social ramifications, the documentary exposed a psychological dimension that was impossible to ignore. Interviews with witnesses and victims revealed lingering trauma, the strain of secrecy, and the constant threat of intimidation. Former insiders described sleepless nights, paranoia, and the burden of knowing dangerous truths. These personal stories lent humanity to the exposé, reminding audiences that beyond the wealth, fame, and influence lay lives irrevocably shaped by fear, manipulation, and deception. Emotional resonance intertwined with factual evidence, creating a compelling narrative that no one could dismiss lightly. As the week progressed, the stakes escalated. Authorities began to prioritize leads inspired by the documentary, while investigative journalists launched follow-up pieces exploring previously inaccessible sources. Viewers eagerly awaited updates, dissecting every press briefing for new revelations. The documentary had sparked a chain reaction that extended far beyond its runtime, touching legal, social, and personal spheres alike. The world watched as if holding its breath, knowing that each new development could alter the trajectory of countless lives. And amidst it all, a quiet but palpable tension grew within the circles of those implicated. Their networks, once insulated by privilege and influence, were beginning to unravel. Allies reconsidered loyalties, potential witnesses weighed consequences, and the sheer scope of exposure became undeniable. Every decision from this point forward carried unprecedented risk. The documentary had not just told a story, it had lit a fuse, one that promised to explode in unforeseen ways, leaving no one untouched. By the time the dust settled from the initial waves of public reaction, the documentary had become more than a revelation, it had become a catalyst. Investigators, armed with the renewed public interest, dug deeper than ever before, revisiting old leads and re-interviewing witnesses who had once been too frightened to speak. The quiet whispers of the past had transformed into clamorous calls for justice. Every alley of suspicion was illuminated by the glare of public scrutiny, leaving those implicated with fewer places to hide. Lawyers warned that even minor inconsistencies in past statements could now carry heavy weight, and financial records were combed over with microscopic precision. The legal net was tightening. For Diddy, the pressure was relentless. Public appearances were strategically limited, and even then, every word was dissected. Interviews were carefully scripted, social media activity scrutinized, and advisors worked tirelessly to prevent further missteps. Yet the documentary had already done what it needed to. The narrative had shifted, and for many, doubt had turned into conviction. Fans and critics alike debated endlessly, weighing the charisma and influence of a celebrated figure against the gravity of allegations newly substantiated. It was a tense dance between reputation and accountability, and the scales seemed to be tipping. Meanwhile, the victims' families found themselves thrust into an unexpected spotlight. The documentary's meticulous timeline, combined with powerful personal accounts, gave their suffering a voice that could no longer be ignored. Media outlets, previously reluctant to confront sensitive issues, now covered their stories extensively, humanizing the tragedy while underscoring the gravity of unresolved cases. Families faced renewed emotional strain, but also a glimmer of hope that justice might finally arrive. Their testimonies, once dismissed or forgotten, now carried authority, amplified by millions of eyes across the globe. Inside law enforcement circles, the documentary acted as both a roadmap and a warning. Cold cases were reprioritized, resources shifted, and investigative strategies recalibrated. Officers followed new leads, cross-checking financial transfers, communications records, and travel logs against the events outlined in the film. Each new discovery seemed to confirm the documentary's assertions, and in some cases, even revealed connections previously unknown. Prosecutors debated the timing of charges, weighing the public interest against the need for airtight legal procedures. Mistakes in this delicate phase could prove catastrophic, yet delay risk losing momentum entirely. As scrutiny intensified, former insiders began to reconsider their silence. Whispers of hidden alliances, clandestine meetings, and undisclosed transactions emerged from anonymous sources. Some feared retaliation, yet the tide of accountability was irresistible. Anonymous letters, cryptic tips, and leaked documents began circulating in investigative circles, each one amplifying the pressure on those entangled in the case. What had once been carefully controlled networks of power and influence now resembled fragile webs, shaking under the weight of relentless exposure. The documentary's impact extended beyond law enforcement and media. It reshaped cultural conversations. Social media was flooded with debates about accountability in the music industry, the ethical responsibilities of powerful figures, and the long-term consequences of unchecked influence. Podcasts, blogs, and talk shows dissected every angle, often referencing the film as the definitive timeline. The lines between entertainment, journalism, and public service blurred, demonstrating that exposure could catalyze action, even decades after events had occurred. Each revelation became part of a larger narrative, one that demanded attention and reflection. Even Diddy's allies felt the strain. Trusted confidants questioned loyalties as the stakes escalated, some distancing themselves to protect their own interests. Old rivalries resurfaced, fueled by the documentary's revelations, and new tensions arose as financial and personal histories were examined under a microscope. The pressure was no longer hypothetical, it was tangible, visible in the eyes of associates who weighed risk against allegiance. Friendships, partnerships, and alliances were all tested in the court of public scrutiny. Amidst the tension, new investigative breakthroughs emerged. Surveillance footage, previously overlooked or dismissed, suddenly acquired significance. Phone records, cross-referenced with testimony, revealed patterns that had been invisible before. These discoveries began to suggest a more intricate network of coordination and concealment than anyone had anticipated. Analysts debated the implications, suggesting that the scope of involvement extended far beyond initial assumptions, potentially implicating figures previously considered untouchable. Diddy, once untouchable in his sphere of influence, now faced pressures that even his carefully crafted public persona could not mitigate. Advisors scrambled to anticipate every potential fallout, meticulously planning responses to each emerging headline and social media narrative. Statements were rehearsed, appearances carefully choreographed, yet no strategy could fully control the narrative once the documentary had permeated public consciousness. Every whisper of doubt, every suggestion of impropriety was amplified across platforms, turning speculation into near certainty in the minds of millions. Within investigative teams, the focus sharpened. Detectives meticulously reanalyzed case files, cross-referenced timelines, and pursued leads that had long been dormant. Forensic accountants traced complex financial transactions, uncovering discrepancies and hidden patterns that were previously dismissed or overlooked. Communication logs, once assumed to be irrelevant, now held critical clues. Analysts worked tirelessly, decoding cryptic messages and reconstructing interactions to piece together a comprehensive picture of events. Every fragment of evidence became a potential pivot point, capable of altering the trajectory of the entire case. Public sentiment played a crucial role during this phase. Social media conversations were no longer idle chatter, they were part of a broader pressure mechanism, influencing both legal and personal spheres. Hashtags trended, debates escalated, and virtual campaigns demanded accountability. The documentary had succeeded in turning passive viewers into active participants, each one contributing to a collective narrative that weighed heavily on the accused. In effect, the public had become an auxiliary investigative force, scrutinizing every detail, every timeline, and every potential lead. Meanwhile, the families affected by the case found themselves navigating a complex mix of hope, fear, and exhaustion. The documentary had given them a renewed voice, but it also intensified their emotional burden. Public attention brought validation, but also relentless exposure, forcing them to relive trauma in both private and public arenas. Every new development, every leak, every testimony, every investigative update carried immense personal weight. The psychological toll was profound, yet many viewed the attention as a necessary step toward justice, a recognition that their suffering mattered. Diddy's inner circle, once tightly knit, began to show cracks. Associates wrestled with divided loyalties, evaluating the risk of continued association against personal and professional consequences. Strategic distancing became a common tactic, and alliances that once seemed unbreakable began to falter. Rivalries, previously dormant, resurfaced with renewed intensity, fueled by both opportunity and fear. Every interaction, every negotiation, was now shaded with caution, as even minor miscalculations could lead to irreversible fallout. Newly surfaced documents added yet another layer of complexity. Contracts, correspondence, and transactional records hinted at a network of influence and concealment more extensive than previously imagined. Analysts and investigators debated the implications, trying to determine which connections were incidental and which were crucial. Each revelation seemed to pull back another layer of a tightly woven web, exposing not only the actions of central figures, but also the shadowed involvement of those who had long believed themselves insulated. Legal strategists faced unprecedented challenges. The evolving public narrative made conventional defense tactics risky, while the sheer volume of evidence complicated prosecutorial approaches. Every decision whether to proceed with charges, negotiate settlements, or delay proceedings carried amplified consequences. Mistakes could be exploited by both the defense and the media, yet indecision risked losing critical momentum. It was a delicate balancing act, where law, perception, and timing intersected with intense stakes. By the end of Part 5, the momentum had shifted irreversibly. The documentary had not merely exposed a timeline, it had catalyzed a movement, one that combined investigative rigor, public scrutiny, and social pressure. The stage was set for confrontation, accountability, and perhaps the most defining moments of the case. Secrets that had long been buried were now vulnerable to exposure, and every figure involved had to confront the reality that the world was watching. The tipping point had arrived, and there was no turning back. Investigators were operating with unprecedented momentum. Every lead unearthed by the documentary was being pursued with intensity, cross-referenced against old files, and analyzed with fresh eyes. Forensic teams revisited crime scenes with modern technology, uncovering traces that had previously gone undetected. Surveillance footage was re-examined frame by frame, while digital communications were decrypted, revealing previously hidden patterns of interaction. What had once been dismissed as circumstantial now demanded attention, and slowly, the pieces of a far more complex puzzle began to coalesce. Diddy, at the center of the storm, faced pressures that went beyond legal strategy. His public image had been irrevocably altered. Fans, critics, and casual observers dissected every appearance, every statement, every social media post. In an environment where perception often outweighed fact, every misstep threatened catastrophic fallout. Advisors worked frantically to mitigate damage, but the sheer scale of public engagement made control impossible. In this phase, influence and reputation had become as critical as legal defenses, and the interplay between media and justice reached a tense equilibrium. Meanwhile, the families affected by the case were in a state of profound emotional turbulence. The documentary had reignited both hope and fear. For years, they had struggled in silence, enduring uncertainty and trauma. Now, as hidden truths surfaced and timelines were exposed, they were forced to confront not only the actions of those directly involved, but also the systemic failures that had allowed secrecy to persist. The public spotlight provided validation, yet it also magnified their suffering, creating a constant tension between the pursuit of justice and personal well-being. Alliances around Diddy had begun to fracture. Individuals once loyal for years weighed the personal risks of continued association. Rivalries simmered beneath the surface, some turning openly hostile, as old grudges intersected with new pressures. Friends became critics, collaborators turned cautious, and strategic distancing became common. The intricate web of relationships revealed vulnerabilities that were previously invisible, illustrating that even the most powerful figures were not immune to the forces of exposure. Legal proceedings escalated in intensity. Prosecutors leveraged new evidence, presenting a narrative that had been meticulously constructed from both traditional investigative methods and insights drawn from public discourse. Defense teams faced the dual challenge of countering legal claims while simultaneously managing a court of public opinion that was increasingly influential. Every motion, every objection, every testimony became a potential turning point, and legal advisors had to navigate not only the statutes, but also the ever-present media scrutiny. Timing and precision became paramount. Social media continued to play an unprecedented role in shaping the unfolding events. Viral posts, expert commentary, and public speculation created a feedback loop that influenced both perception and action. The documentary had catalyzed a participatory culture, transforming audiences into active stakeholders. Public campaigns demanded accountability, influencing investigative priorities and reinforcing the urgency of action. In this digital arena, reputations could be shattered or salvaged in real time, making every communication strategy a matter of survival. By mid-part 6, the case had reached a critical juncture. Investigative breakthroughs, combined with mounting public pressure, forced key figures to make decisive moves. Statements were issued, testimonies delivered, and previously concealed actions brought to light. The convergence of media exposure, legal strategy, and social scrutiny created a high-stakes environment where outcomes were uncertain, but consequences were unavoidable. The narrative that had been simmering for months now approached its climax, setting the stage for definitive revelations. The climax of Part 6 was characterized by a relentless pursuit of accountability. Secrets once considered untouchable were now vulnerable to scrutiny, and the intricate network of influence surrounding Diddy and others faced unprecedented challenge. Investigators, prosecutors, media, and public opinion coalesced into a force that demanded truth. Every revelation, every confrontation, every exposure carried profound implications not just for those directly involved, but for the broader cultural and societal framework in which the events had unfolded. As the chapter closed, it was evident that the repercussions would be far-reaching. The documentary had not simply presented a case, it had dismantled complacency, exposed hidden machinations, and demanded justice on a scale that few could ignore. The reckoning was not just about one individual or a single legal outcome. It was about the unmasking of systemic deception, the assertion of accountability, and the enduring power of transparency. The story had reached a crescendo, leaving both participants and observers to confront the truth in all its complexity and signaling that while some questions had been answered, the broader implications would reverberate long after the cameras stopped rolling.